Hello, I am the Jaquio, or maybe I am the Jaquimo. That's better. Welcome to Bad 90s Mixtapes. Yeah, that's right, this is a new series. Normally on my regular show, Bad 90s Music, I will focus on one band or artist and then try to talk about their career throughout the 90s and say a little bit about all of the music that they released during the 90s. This is an idea that I had where I would focus on a specific genre or category or scene, just to give me a little chance to sort of group together a bunch of similar stuff that I want to talk about and that I want you to hear. So the first thing I've chosen to focus on is 90s emo. The term emo actually dates back to the 80s. It was first used in reference to the band Rites of Spring from Washington, D.C. Rites of Spring were a hardcore punk band. They released one album in 1985 and one EP the year after that. The thing that made Rites of Spring different from other hardcore bands at the time was their singer Guy Picciotto had a vocal approach that was very desperately overly passionate and, well, just listen. This is the song For Want Of, and you can sort of hear in the approach to the vocalist, I can't really call what he's doing singing. It's not the same as normal hardcore shouting. It sounds sort of like a man in the middle of a nervous breakdown, and that's pretty much what got this music labeled emo-core, which was supposed to be short for emotional hardcore. Immediately the term was disowned. Nobody's actually quite sure who came up with it. Its origins are very difficult to trace. What we do know for sure is that nobody wanted to be known as emo. Once you got tagged as that, that's like the Scarlet E. You know, that's a label that's going to sink you forever. And Rites of Spring didn't last. They broke up. Ian MacKaye of Minor Threat formed his own band that was sort of in the mold of Rites of Spring called Embrace. And then later on, the members of Rites of Spring and Embrace sort of joined forces to create Fugazi, who became the greatest band of all time. They left this kind of music behind. The whole scene sort of died out. There were a few other bands that were similar. What sort of brought the term back into common usage again were bands in the 90s. By this time, they were taking post-hardcore music and combining it with alternative rock and indie rock and a lot of other different sounds, sort of make this new type of music, which was just called emo. They took the core out of it entirely. I mean, the term is admittedly very reductive. It doesn't really fit, I think, with the style of music it was originally applied to. I think the reason why the members of Rites of Spring and Embrace were so quick to try to dodge that label or duck that label was because it's like, oh, no shit, the music emotional. You think the music is emotional? Come on. You're missing the point. If that's all you get out of it is, wow, this is really emotional music. You know, they believed in something. They were trying to change the culture that they found themselves in. They would find a way to do that in their later musical projects. But in the 90s, I think when they started to use the term emo to apply to groups in the 90s who were creating more of a new style of music, the label seemed like it fit the bill a little bit better. It still seems like a very unflattering term because it seems to denote a certain immaturity and oversensitivity and inability to cope with normal everyday life. Coincidentally, I happen to be a very immature, oversensitive person who is unable to cope with the realities of everyday life, and I find this music really speaks to me. The first major band who got tagged emo in the 90s was Sunny Day Real Estate from Seattle, and Sunny Day Real Estate sort of brought in a lot of the common elements that you would find in later examples of this music, such as slower tempos, really aimed for a sense of grandiosity and grandeur and okay, kind of pomposity too. They sort of presented it in this kind of poetic context. But they did introduce a lot of those hallmarks. A lot of clean, arpeggiated guitar patterns, a lot of twinkly sort of guitar notes, a lot of octave chords during the louder or the more emotionally high parts of the song, and vocals that can only be described as girlish squealing. They sort of started all of this. You can hear it in their 1994 album Diary. This is called Song About an Angel. This album was released on Sub Pop in 1994. They're one of the few bands, I think, that you would find in this type of scene that sounded like they had ambitions towards a little more of a progressive rock sort of style. Their ability was very advanced in terms of the type of music that they were doing and the type of scene that they came from. They just overall had a much stronger sense of musicality than a lot of the other bands, and they used it to create this, this music that kind of veered from being beautiful and soothing and relaxing into being a little more harder edged and louder and not quite aggressive, very passionate, and the structure of this song has at least 6 or 7 distinct parts to it that it just moves through, one after the other. Here's another one. Different parts almost play out as movements. You hear a lot of this type of songwriting in this genre as well. Maybe without quite as high a level of musicianship. Sunny Day Real Estate were basically the first big emo band of the 90s. They became very popular in the underground. Other bands followed suit. This is the song Slower by Mineral from their 1997 album, The Power of Failing. Mineral came from Austin, Texas. They released a couple of albums before breaking up in the 90s, and then they reunited recently, a couple of years back. The production that Mineral had is not quite as good as what Sunny Day Real Estate had. Their music, I think, was a little more direct, a little more immediate. They weren't playing around with quite so many different, confusing types of parts. But check out the bass line of this part. The bass line starts playing these awesome triplet runs of this part. Oh yeah, you didn't think we wouldn't talk about these guys, did you? Okay, 3 things that people don't know about Jimmy Eat World. First of all, their name does not refer to the singer Jim Adkins. Second, Jim Adkins wasn't even their original singer. Tom was the original, and for a while they both sang vocals, and then Jim just eventually took over completely. And 3, they were on a major label for years in the 90s before they even broke through to the mainstream. This was from their second album, Static Prevails, released on Capitol Records in 1996, and this song is called Call It in the Air. Yeah, they sounded a little different back then, didn't they? Jimmy Eat World were from Mesa, Arizona. A lot of the bands who played this style of music came from the Midwest. This sound is sort of labeled as Midwest emo, even though not all the bands are from the Midwest. It's basically the sound that was embraced by that part of the country. A lot of these bands formed and came out of nowhere and just kind of toured the nation and made a name for themselves. Including this one. At this part, you can kind of hear both singers. Honestly, they sound kind of just like each other. I can't really tell them apart. Actually, you can kind of hear why some major label executive thought that they might have potential to become a popular band. Even back then, it sort of had this solid grasp of hooks and structure and songwriting right away. This is their major label debut. Unfortunately, at the time, they were stuck performing with a bunch of ska bands. They weren't really set up to succeed. And this is the song To a Husband at War by the band I Hate Myself from Gainesville, Florida. This is from their 1997 release, 10 Songs. Really sure exactly what I Hate Myself's deal was. I have heard that they were sort of a parody of an emo band. They were trying to be tongue-in-cheek by copying some of the cliches of the genre. But I think the music also works as sort of an earnest attempt at it as well. You can sort of enjoy it on both of those levels. This song is Fire Engine Red by the band Boys Life. They are from Kansas City, Missouri. This is from their 1996 album, Departures and Landfalls. I don't know a lot about this band. This album is pretty good. The production on it is not quite as well produced as the other bands in this genre. You know, a lot of these bands sound a little scruffy and a little underproduced, almost amateurish in a way, but their playing is solid. Shoot. Not now, Goofy. Ugh. This is the song A Jack with One Eye by Texas Is a Reason from their 1996 album, Do You Know Who You Are? named after what was allegedly the last phrase or the last sentence that anybody said to John Lennon when he was alive. One of the songs that has all of the hallmarks of the genre. You can hear a very long, slow sort of build-up going on in it. A lot of the bands really emphasize these strong dynamics between the quiet and the loud parts, and often they would just shift from one into the other with really no transition whatsoever. Texas is the Reason, of course, is named after a line from the song Bullet by the Misfits, a very un-emo song about the assassination of JFK. And a lot of the song titles from this album also have references to the JFK assassination, such as Back and to the Left. This band is from New York City, New York, by the way. They sound just like one of the Midwest bands. I don't think there are a lot of bands in this genre that are from the same part of the country as them. You know, maybe there are some from Boston or Philly. There was a lot of them, that's my point. There were a lot of these bands, they came from all over the place. Here comes the octave chord part. This is the song Died on 8 by Chrissy Front Drive. This band came from Denver, Colorado. This is from their 1994 release called Chrissy Front Drive. It was an EP. So according to the book Nothing Feels Good, Punk Rock Teenagers in the Emo by Andy Greenwald, the talent scout from Capitol Records who signed Jimmy Eat World is originally trying to sign Chrissy Front Drive. I guess they turned him down or they declined his offer. At the time, Jimmy Eat World had done a split 7-inch with Chrissy Front Drive, so he just went after Jimmy Eat World instead, and they ended up being more amenable to the offer from the major label. Yeah, just think, somewhere there's an alternate universe where Chrissy Front Drive became the poster children for this genre in the mainstream instead of Jimmy Eat World. You know, this music in particular almost has sort of a dream pop type of quality to it. A lot of emo has some shoegaze influences that I can hear in it. You can hear guitar parts that sort of sound like My Bloody Valentine in there, and some of them have almost more post-rock-ish tendencies. Later on, bands like the Appleseed Cast would take that in more of a new direction. But in the 90s, music pretty much stayed similar to this. Okay, this is the song Full On by Sam I Am, and they were more of a punk style band or post-hardcore band. Started more in the early 90s from California. This is from their 1998 album You Are Freaking Me Out. This band sort of got lumped in with the emo genre, but I think they only sort of halfway fit into it. I really like them, that's why I'm including them in this episode. They had enough in common, I think, with the other bands in the genre that it sort of fit on the bill with them. They had the really impassioned vocals, they had this octave chord action going on. The music was a lot more up-tempo and energetic, I think. This is the band Planes Mistaken for Stars with their song Copper and Stars, released in 1999 on Deep Elm Records. This band is a little more on the post-hardcore side of things, featuring a singer who I think sounds a lot like Paul Westerberg from The Replacements. In fact, I've always thought the band's name was a reference to the song Valentine by The Replacements, where he says, "When you wish upon a star that turns into a plane." I was not able to confirm that, but I suspect that's where the name comes from. I think this is a band that from the start had some heavier tendencies or more metal tendencies than other bands in this genre. They become almost this full-on crust punk band later on, or almost power violence sort of sound. But this was the sort of sound they started with. I've always thought this was neat. He sings the lyrics I'm breaking down over and over again during the breakdown of the song. Maybe it's a little on the nose, but I like it. I'm I'm going to do a bunch of these episodes in a row, and each one is going to be examining a different genre or a different scene or trend, I guess, exploring the different musical movements that were taking place during the 90s. And I'm going to put the link to the Spotify playlist in the description of this video if you want to check out more of this music. The playlist on Spotify has songs from other important bands such as Cap'n Jazz, Jawbreaker, The Promise Ring. Check that out sometime if you're curious to hear a little bit more of this time music. Till next time, I am the Jaquio. This was Bad 90s Mixtapes, and I'll see you sometime in the future.